where the wind remembers. The last stretch of the road wasn't really a road at all, just two frozen ruts leading into the gray ribs of the Sierra. Mara Quinn eased the truck up the incline, tires slipping once, twice before catching on gravel. The altimeter on her wrist ticked past 10,000 feet. The world narrowed to stone and sky. Every breath felt metallic. She parked where the track ended, a small shelf of granite that dropped into a valley scattered with snowfields. The sun was thin, the kind of light that flattens every color but blue. When she killed the engine, silence rushed in so quickly it made her ears ring. She sat for a long time with her hands on the steering wheel, listening to the heartbeat of the mountain, wind against rock, an occasional crack of ice shifting somewhere out of sight. She stepped out into air so cold it felt sharp enough to cut. Field log 47, she said automatically, clicking on her recorder. Elevation 10, 240 feet. Arrival time 1400 hours. Wind speed, steady northwest, 12 knots. Her own voice sounded alien against the emptiness. She drew in the silence again and added softer, no sign of recent storms. The job was simple: collect the last round of glacial retreat data for a grant that was already dying. Her sensors and data loggers were packed neatly in waterproof cases, each labeled in black marker, the handwriting precise. She'd built her life on precision. After Daniel vanished last winter, lost to a whiteout that closed like a curtain, precision was what she had left. She began unpacking methodically. Tripod, weather sensor, data logger. The ritual steadied her. The mountains were dependable in that way, indifferent, honest. By late afternoon, she had camp set. A low orange tent anchored by stones, her instruments staked in a rough half circle facing the glacier basin. She took a short walk to acclimate, boots crunching over crusted snow, the air so thin it hummed in her ears. From the ridge, she could see a second valley beyond, folded in shadow. Something flickered there, sunlight off metal maybe, but when she blinked it was gone. Field log 47B, she said into the mic. Surface temperature -3 Celsius. Strange resonance along the ridge, almost harmonic, probably wind cavity between rock layers. She paused. It sounds alive. She followed the tone downhill, tracing it to a break in the slope where boulders had slumped decades ago. Beneath them, half hidden by snow, was a shape that didn't belong, a line too straight, an angle too deliberate. She brushed away frost with her glove and felt the edges of stacked stone. The structure was small, barely the size of a shed, built from rough-cut granite blocks blackened by lichen. The entrance faced north, framed by two cracked beams of wood. She crouched and peered inside. The interior smelled of dust and cold iron. Her headlamp caught the glint of metal tins, a rusted compass, a broken lantern. Someone had built this a century ago and left it to freeze into the mountain. She ducked inside. The air felt heavier, muffled. She brushed her fingers across the compass. Its needle trembled, not from her touch, but from something else, a vibration deeper than sound. She set it down quickly. Near the back wall lay a small tin box, sealed with a twist of waxed cloth. The wax crumbled at her touch. Inside was a journal, the leather warped and stiff, but miraculously intact. The first page bore the name A. Lemaire, Expedition Survey, 1902. Mara sat on the stone floor and read by headlamp glow. The handwriting looped elegantly, describing frostbite, dwindling rations, a team of 4 reduced to 2. The entries grew erratic toward the end. The pass moves with the wind, one line read. It remembers those who listen. She exhaled, a cloud of breath curling into the beam of light. Poetic, Mr. Lemaire, she murmured, but not very scientific. Outside, daylight was fading to silver. She packed the journal into her bag and stepped out. The air had gone still. The mountains held their breath. Then, as she turned to zip her tent flap against the first needles of snow, the wind returned. Slow at first, then rising until it found a pitch that made the shelter walls tremble. It was the same tone she'd recorded earlier, a pure note that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She froze, half inside the tent, listening. The sound wavered, climbed, then steadied again. Not random gusts, sustained, deliberate. It swelled until she could feel it in her chest, a resonance so deep it seemed to reach inside her heartbeat and match it. She switched on the recorder. Field log 47C, harmonic frequency approximately E-flat, origin unclear. she hesitated. Feels like it's coming through the mountain. Snow began to fall, flakes catching the last trace of sun like sparks. She turned a slow circle, the ridge towering above her, the basin below already lost in shadow. Every gust sent new flurries swirling around her legs. It was beautiful, terrible in its scale, the kind of beauty that could erase you without meaning to. She crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and listened as the note continued outside. Low, patient, ancient, the sound of the mountain breathing. Mara woke to a pallid light, leaking through the tent fabric. The air was brittle. Her breath had frozen in lace patterns across the inner walls. The wind had died some time before dawn, leaving a silence so total it made the world feel hollowed out. She unzipped the flap. The ridge lay under a glaze of ice. Every surface caught the morning sun and sent it scattering in hard white shards. Below her, the valley was still shadowed, the riverbed a ribbon of dull pewter. It was the kind of beauty that came with warning labels. She brewed coffee over the tiny stove, the hiss of gas unnaturally loud. Her instruments blinked steady green, but when she downloaded the overnight data, the readings made no sense. Barometric pressure had spiked and dropped in repeating waves. The anemometer had captured gusts, forming a perfect rhythm. 3 long pulses, 1 short, over and over, for hours. "Wind doesn't keep time," she whispered. She replayed the audio log. The sound filled the tent, a deep vibration that seemed to form a pattern just beyond recognition. She caught herself holding her breath to listen better, as if something in the noise might speak. She shut off the recorder. "Field log 48, she said, forcing steadiness. "Harmonic repetition observed. Possible mechanical interference from loose sensor housing. We'll inspect." Outside, her footprints from yesterday had already softened. She followed them back to the stone shelter, the snow squeaking under her boots. The structure looked smaller in daylight, almost shy. Inside, the air was colder than the wind outside. Her headlamp beam shook as she examined the walls. The interior stones bore scratches, straight lines intersecting in a grid. Not claw marks, not erosion. Human. She brushed frost away until words emerged. North shifts with breath. The letters were old, the edges softened by time. She stepped back quickly, bumping her shoulder against the wall. Her heartbeat was suddenly too loud. Mara steadied herself. "Probably Lemaire's crew," she said aloud, because saying something logical helped. "Compass deviation. Airflow note." The compass on the ground answered by quivering and rotating a full half-turn before stopping again. She crouched, staring at it. The movement had been slow, graceful, almost intentional. When she lifted it, the needle drifted toward the doorway, pointing not north but directly into the windless morning. For the first time since Daniel's disappearance, she felt the particular kind of fear that belongs to mountains. The fear of scale, of knowing how small you are against their patience. She stepped outside and looked toward the ridgeline. The air above it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from the frozen slope. The hum returned, softer now, almost kind. It slid around her, not in the air, but through the stone beneath her boots. A memory, maybe, looping through rock and time. She pressed record. "Field log 49, frequency stable, compass deviation persistent, visual distortion along ridge. I don't understand what I'm seeing." The sound swelled, folded on itself, and then, just as suddenly, stopped. The silence that followed was worse, a vacuum where her own breathing felt intrusive. She looked back toward the shelter. Snow swirled at its doorway, though the air around her was still. Inside that brief whirl, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of red cloth, her own jacket color, vanishing as quickly as it came. The recorder clicked off. Mara backed away until her heels met the rock behind her. For a long time she didn't move, watching the doorway as light shifted inch by inch across the stones. The fear ebbed, leaving behind something else, a pull, a question that felt older than language. She packed the compass and the journal into her field bag. The hum did not return, but the mountain no longer seemed silent. It seemed to be waiting. That evening, she sat on a boulder above her camp, notebook open on her knees. The sun fell behind the ridge, turning snowfields to copper and shadow. The sky went from blue to iron gray. In the last light, the shelter's roof reflected a faint gleam, as if metal lay just beneath the stone. Mara whispered to herself, "The pass moves with the wind." Saying the words out loud felt like opening a door. Below her, the wind began again, gentle, measured, deliberate. It climbed in pitch until the tone she'd recorded returned, not loud, but endless, threading through the valley like breath. She could feel it travel through her ribs, resonating there. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost believe the sound was remembering something, trying to tell her what it once was. The first snowflakes of the new storm touched her hair. Mara stood, pocketed the recorder, and faced the ridge. "I'll listen," she said. The wind answered, a note of agreement, low and full of power. The sky darkened. The mountain exhaled. And far below, hidden in ice and time, the high pass began to shift. Morning came bright and brittle. The storm had dusted the ridges in clean lines, the way wind sometimes paints snow into calligraphy. Mara moved slowly, careful not to disturb the shapes. Her tent glittered with a thin rind of ice, every thread haloed by frost. The valley below looked new, erased and redrawn overnight. She lit the stove and melted snow in a tin cup. The smell of metal and coffee mingled with cold air. She set her tablet on a dry patch of granite and opened the previous night's files. Data spilled across the screen, barometric patterns, temperature spikes, oscillating wind speed graphs. At first glance, they looked random, but as she scrolled, the pattern became obvious. Symmetrical pulses, repeating every 32 seconds, like a heartbeat stretched across hours. "Field log 50, she said into the recorder. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. "Wind readings continue in harmonic series. She hesitated, glancing toward the ridge. "I don't know if the sensors are responding to pressure changes or to each other." She listened again. The wind was calm, almost shy now, rustling the nylon edges of her tent. Yet beneath it was a deeper resonance, like the sound a cello makes before the bow touches string, potential humming inside silence. Mara swallowed the last of her coffee and started the hike toward her instruments. They stood half-buried, their slender rods glittering with ice. One of the tripods had fallen, its guy line snapped clean through. She crouched, brushing snow from the anemometer blades. They were intact. As she checked the bolts, a flicker caught her eye. The ridge above shimmered as if sun flared off water. She shaded her eyes, squinting, but there was nothing, only the steady white glare of day. She recorded anyway. Possible lensing effect in upper atmosphere. Could be heat distortion, though ambient is -4. When she stood, the compass on her belt jerked. The needle swung left, paused, then turned a slow circle. She tapped it. It kept spinning. The motion was too smooth for magnetism, too patient. She laughed once, nervously. "You're not supposed to do that." The laughter died quickly. She tried the GPS next. Coordinates blinked, then froze. A second later, the device restarted itself and displayed a single line of text across the screen. "Signal found." No numbers, no map, just those words. Her breath fogged. She waited for an explanation to form in her mind. Software glitch, condensation short, but none arrived. Only the wind answered, sighing through the stones in long, deliberate phrases. Mara slung the gear over her shoulder and returned to camp. The day stayed unnervingly still. Even the ravens that had circled the valley yesterday were gone. Inside the tent, she reviewed Lemaire's notebook again. Most of the ink had faded to gray, but on one page the letters were darker than before, as if rewritten. "When the air forgets, the stone remembers." She stared at it until the letters seemed to move. "You can't rewrite yourself," she said under her breath. Yet when she flipped back, the previous page bore a new stain, thin arcs of moisture, shaped like fingerprints. Her stomach tightened. The logical part of her brain raced to keep control. Humidity, condensation, oil transfer, any explanation to fit the data. But another part, the one that had stood helpless during Daniel's whiteout, recognized something older than logic. Dusk crept down the ridge. Shadows stretched until they merged with her camp. She ate a protein bar without tasting it, then set a fresh battery into the recorder. "Field log 51. Shelter site stable. Atmospheric anomalies persist. Compass non-functional. I'm hearing tonal carryover even without wind movement." She swallowed. "Sounds like breath in the rock." A faint vibration ran through the ground then, subtle enough that she thought she imagined it. Her mug trembled against the stone. The hum rose once, E-flat again, and vanished. Mara looked up sharply. The mountains were gray silhouettes against a violet sky, silent, vast, absolute. She felt it again, that blend of reverence and fear that had chased her since she arrived. She whispered, "What are you trying to remember?" The air did not answer, but in the distance, from somewhere beyond the pass, a single echo of her voice returned, soft, perfect, delayed by 5 full heartbeats. She froze. Then it came again, fainter this time, as if carried on a tide of wind that had yet to arrive. Night fell like an extinguished lamp. The next morning broke sharp and crystalline, as if the storm had polished the sky overnight. Mara packed slowly, every gesture deliberate. Gloves tightened, straps checked twice. Precision was her ritual against chaos. She had meant to descend today, but the ridge held her. From camp, the unmarked trail was clearly visible now, a faint depression snaking upward through scree, carved into angles too neat to be chance. It had not been there yesterday. She told herself the new snow simply outlined a natural drainage, yet some stubborn part of her knew the shape had been waiting all along for her to notice. She logged her decision aloud. Field log 52. Temporary deviation from descent route. Investigating possible historical trail markers. Estimated 1-hour survey, weather permitting. The recorder clicked off. The silence that followed felt like permission. She began to climb. The path rose through scattered pines and slabs of granite veined with quartz. The air thinned until her breath came in small white bursts. Every sound carried far, the clink of her trekking pole, the squeak of boots. Somewhere below, meltwater trickled beneath ice, keeping time. Halfway up, she paused to take a reading. Her altimeter showed a gain of 200 feet. The compass lay motionless, needle dead center, finally behaving. When she pocketed it and looked up, the trail ahead bent subtly left, vanishing behind a shoulder of rock. She rounded the bend and stopped. Her orange marker ribbons, left at intervals on the way up, were already ahead of her, fluttering on stones she hadn't reached. She stared, pulse climbing, then trudged forward to tear one free. The knot was hers, the frayed edge unmistakable. She turned a slow circle. The slope behind her was blank, unmarked. For a moment she thought she heard footsteps in the snow behind her. She spun around. Nothing, only wind brushing the ridge, steady, patient, ancient. "Mara, you're tired," she whispered. "That's all." She pushed on until she reached a ledge overlooking 2 valleys, the one she'd climbed from and another she didn't recognize, a pale basin shaped like an open hand. Clouds crawled along its rim, sliding over peaks like breath over glass. She set down her pack and pulled out the notebook. The latest page now bore a sketch, faint pencil lines showing the same hand-shaped valley from this very angle. She hadn't drawn it. Her throat tightened. She flipped back to earlier entries, hunting for context. New words trailed across the margins, thin as spider silk. The woman with the red jacket walks where I walked. Wind lifted the edge of the page and held it there. The sun had lowered when she started back, yet every direction led upward. The trail no longer descended. She recognized boulders she had passed an hour earlier, but they stood at new angles as though the slope had turned while she wasn't looking. A thin unease spread through her chest, the same feeling she'd known during Daniel's storm, that quiet certainty that nature could erase her without intention or malice. She forced herself to breathe evenly, counting steps, repeating coordinates like a mantra. The ridge answered with a sound, not a gust, not even a hum, something between the two, like stone vibrating under strain. She felt it through her boots first, a pulse traveling through rock into bone. Then came a second pulse, delayed by a heartbeat, matching her rhythm. She switched on the recorder with shaking hands. Field log 53, resonance through ground material, possibly seismic microtremor, repeating interval. The words caught in her throat as the vibration grew. It was not random, it was keeping pace with her breathing. When it stopped, the silence felt wrong, heavy with listening. She climbed faster, driven by equal parts awe and fear. The path narrowed to a cornice only a few feet wide. Beyond it, the world fell away into white haze. She looked down once, long enough to feel vertigo flood her gut, then fixed her eyes ahead. The wind pressed against her, neither hostile nor kind, merely present, immense. At the cornice's end stood a cairn built of black volcanic stones, slick with ice. They didn't belong to this granite range. She knelt beside it, tracing the markings cut into the top rock. The grooves formed the same pattern she'd seen scratched inside the shelter, intersecting lines and one phrase beneath them. When you forget the path, the wind will remember for you. Her gloves trembled. She looked up. Across the valley, another ridge shimmered with a light she couldn't place, neither sun nor reflection. It pulsed once, twice, then steadied, as if something enormous had drawn a single breath. Mara rose slowly, heart hammering, and whispered to the air, "Then remember me." The wind answered in kind, a rising tone that threaded through her name, low and beautiful and terrible. She turned toward it. The trail ahead seemed to ripple, each stone aligning into a new direction that hadn't existed moments before. Snow fell sideways, though the air around her was still. Her fear didn't vanish, it deepened, tempered by wonder. The mountain was awake, and she impossibly was part of its remembering. She took one step forward into the sound. By late afternoon, the light had thinned to a strange brass color, the hue that means snow is near. Mara could smell it before she saw it, a clean, metallic scent that tightened the air. She had not eaten since dawn, but felt no hunger, only the low electric tremor that comes before a storm. She followed the newly aligned path upward. The cairn behind her vanished in blowing mist. Ahead, the ridge widened into a plateau. The glacier basin on her left glowed faintly, veins of blue ice visible through drifting cloud. Everything was silent except for the faint vibration beneath her feet, a heartbeat too deep to be her own. At the center of the plateau stood another marker, this one larger, a circle of stones waist-high, dusted with snow. She walked to it, brushing ice from the top. Carved into the central slab were two initials, A.L., and a date half erased by frost. Lemaire. "Field log 54, she said, breath quick. "Located additional monument, coordinates." She looked down at her GPS. The screen was black. "Device failure. Manual notation impossible." She laughed once, the sound brittle. "Of course." The first flake touched her cheek, then another. Within minutes, the air thickened with snow, blowing sideways. The wind rose in long gusts that struck the ridge like waves. She dropped to her knees to anchor herself, arms wrapped around the recorder. "Wind velocity." The gust tore the words away. She crawled to the stone circle, pressed her back against it. The storm had a pattern, not chaos, the same four-beat rhythm she'd seen in her data. Between gusts, she could hear tones, E-flat, then A, then E again, climbing like a chant. Her fear sharpened into focus. This wasn't rage, it was order. The mountain wasn't trying to kill her. It was speaking in the only language it had. Lightning split the sky, revealing the ridge ahead for a heartbeat. A shape moved there, a figure wrapped in white, carrying a light that swung slowly with each step. It moved exactly as she had climbed an hour ago. Same gait, same pauses. When the flash faded, the light remained, flickering amber through the snow. She shouted over the wind, "Who's there?" The words vanished, swallowed instantly. The figure lifted its lantern higher, lightning again, and she saw its face, her own. The shock stole her breath. The reflection wavered, not perfect, her features blurred by motion, eyes bright as the snow itself. She stumbled forward a few steps before instinct stopped her. Between them yawned a chasm that had not been there, a clean, impossible split in the ridge, black as ink. On the other side, her double mirrored her posture exactly. Both of them stood with one hand lifted, palm open, snow swirling through the space between. The wind howled until it found the E-flat again and held it, a tone so deep it filled her ribs. The air thickened with sound. Mara closed her eyes. For a moment she felt everything, the pull of gravity, the drag of years, the memory of Daniel's voice on a radio lost to static. The tone gathered all of it and returned it transformed, a vast harmonic that carried sorrow and joy in the same breath. When she opened her eyes, the figure across the chasm had lowered its lantern. The light spread instead through the snow itself, illuminating the whole ridge from within. The storm no longer roared. It sang, wind across miles of stone resonating like the string of a single colossal instrument. She whispered, "I hear you." The words were snatched upward, folded into the sound. The mountain answered with a crescendo that shook the air into visible waves. Her compass leapt from her pocket, needle spinning so fast it blurred. The stones beneath her vibrated until cracks spidered through the ice. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound collapsed inward. A silence so vast it felt physical pressed against her ears. Snow fell straight down. The figure was gone. Her knees gave out. She knelt in the settling snow, lungs burning. Around her, the landscape had changed, gentler somehow, as if distance had compressed. The chasm was gone, the circle of stones unbroken. Only the lantern remained, half buried at her feet, its metal blackened by age. Inside it, a small flame still burned blue. She reached toward it. The glass was warm, not hot, alive. She cupped it carefully, half expecting it to fade, but it held steady, reflecting in her eyes. In its light, she saw her own face streaked with tears, calm and unafraid. The wind moved once more, not violent now, but soft, an exhale that bent the falling snow around her in a slow spiral. It carried no words, only a memory, the faintest trace of another voice layered over her own. She whispered into the swirl, "I understand." The wind rose one final time, brushed her hair across her face like a hand, and was gone. Mara stood alone on the ridge, the lantern flame trembling in her palm. Around her stretched a silence so perfect it seemed eternal. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She felt remembered. When the storm ended, it did not fade. It simply stopped, as if a door had closed somewhere behind the sky. The silence that followed was heavier than the wind had ever been. Snow drifted in slow spirals from a cloudless vault. The world felt washed, reborn. Mara stood in the quiet for a long time, the small blue flame flickering inside the old lantern cupped in her hands. The metal was etched with frost and time, but the light inside glowed steady, patient. When she looked down at it, she saw her reflection, pale, eyes wide but calm. No fear left, only knowing. She breathed out, watching the vapor rise. "Field log," she began, then stopped. Her recorder was gone. Somewhere in the storm it had been taken, perhaps buried, perhaps claimed. She didn't mind. The mountain had recorded everything already. The compass lay nearby, frozen open, its glass cracked. She picked it up, more out of habit than hope. The needle no longer pointed anywhere. It simply quivered, caught between directions, as though unsure which way the world had turned. Mara slid it into her pocket, then started down. The ridge was unrecognizable. What had been jagged rock was now a smooth sweep of snow, soft as breath. There was no trace of her tracks, no cairns, no orange ribbons. Only one line of indentations marked the slope ahead of her, footprints descending in a straight path as though someone else had already gone that way. She followed. The light shifted as she walked, taking on the gold clarity that comes only after storms. The sun, low and cold, spilled across the snowfields like a promise. The silence was not empty now. It vibrated faintly, a memory of the tone that had filled it hours ago. Each step released a muffled note, the mountain remembering her weight. She passed the place where the shelter had been. Only bare granite met her eyes, the stone damp and unmarked. But when she paused there, the air thickened slightly, the same gentle resonance humming through her boots. She knelt and pressed her hand flat against the rock. "Thank you," she whispered. The vibration answered once, a heartbeat through stone, then faded. She descended slowly, the valley opened below, the frozen river gleaming like glass. At the base of the slope, where she'd first parked her truck, a faint mist lingered. The world felt both larger and nearer, distances folding inward as though the land itself were breathing easier. When she reached the valley floor, she turned for one last look. The ridge was clear now, every detail etched in the sharp light of afternoon. There was no sign of the storm, no movement, no sound, yet as she watched, a single gust of wind rose from the glacier and curled upward, tracing the path she'd taken. It whistled faintly through the gaps in the rocks, forming that same harmonic note, the E-flat that had begun everything. The sound lingered for a few seconds, then stretched thin, dissolving into sky. She whispered into the emptiness. You remember. And in the smallest way, it answered, a flicker in the snow, a shadow moving just beyond sight, a breath of air warm against her cheek. By the time she reached the truck, evening had settled. She placed the old lantern on the dashboard. Its flame had gone out somewhere along the descent, yet the glass was still warm to touch. When she turned the key, the engine caught on the first try, humming low like the wind's echo. The tires crunched over ice as she started down the long dirt road toward lower ground. The mountains loomed in the mirror, their peaks bright with fading light. As the road curved and they disappeared behind a ridge, she felt no loss, only a quiet assurance that they would remember her, the way stone remembers the shape of everything it shelters. She whispered almost to herself, "Field log final. The pass is steady again. The mountain remembers." The wind outside answered faintly, a sound like pages turning. And then the world grew still, holding its breath. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day.